The recent video I did on FlyWire about forget best glide speed, just trim full nose up, has caused a blizzard of comment, and that's good. Got people thinking, at least. We're going to take a look at some of those discussion points, so stick with us on FlyWire. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire I want to dig in a little deeper into the comments and topics raised by my recent video testing the technique of trimming full nose up to achieve best glide speed. That's what it was advertised as, not something else. So anyway, let's get to it. The biggest one of these was misperception that I used the autopilot to execute the maneuver. I'm sorry, folks, but if you think that, you just weren't paying attention to what I was saying or doing. I specifically said I started the engine off portion by pulling power, pulling the throttle on the autopilot, and then I disconnected it on the video, and you can hear that. Later on, you can see in the video of the dash exactly what's going on. And then I started to manually trim. I think this misperception, frankly, was unfortunate because these folks were so diverted by the squirrel of the autopilot, and they totally missed the reality that the trim technique did not work at all in this airplane. So what happened is, or was, a real world issue. My autopilot, a Garmin GFC 500, has this thing called Enhanced Stability and Protection, or ESP. Then the nose up trim position, manually set, called for a speed that was below the low speed floor protection for the ESP system. And it activated the pitch up, which inputs a pitch up command to the pitch servo at a specified torque value. It does not use trim to do that. Okay, that's what this autopilot doesn't do that. Some do. This doesn't. I'm going to do it. It does have electric trim, but you have to actually. The autopilot has to be engaged for that to happen, and you have it. I'm going to do another video exploring the Garmin ESP system, so stand by on that. Way too much detail for this particular video. I did mention in the video that the trim was for CG, implying that speed was a part of that. By certification standard, trim is to reduce force loads on the pilot. Check it out. Part 23.2140, and see what it says. I also talked briefly about the fact that trimming is for a particular coefficient of lift at specific angle of attack. That is what is happening aerodynamically on the wing. But in single-engine GA airplanes like this, we don't have an AOA indicator. So we use the proxy of speed. When I say we trim for a speed, give me a break here, really. If you truly understand the aerodynamics in flying an airplane, the term works. It's what we have. We don't have angle of attack. With a real vane-derived AOA, you don't need speed at all. But we don't have that. Okay? Even the ones out there are pressure differentials, not vanes. In the Jurassic jets that I flew in the Air Force, we had angle of attack indicators that gave visual representations of AOA, at least the early ones. The F4 even had an audio tone, but there were no associated values. We computed approach speeds based on weight, and in the F-15 we had actual numbers and reference values to fly for various situations and configurations, and we no longer computed approach speeds. You used angle of attack. That's it. I mean, there was that backup if you had to, but pretty much only angle of attack. In the airlines today, they do have vane-derived AOA, but they still compute speeds as a reference. They don't use the AOA as a reference. Why? I'll never understand. Way above my pay grade. With all the noise and misunderstanding about the autopilot, I think what got missed here is that the best glide speed, what the best glide speed is all about, and that this trim technique, what the trim technique results in. The trim technique being tested in the Bonanza resulted in a speed well below the best glide and even below min sync. It was something like 30-ish knots below best glide. I mentioned wing loading and CG as issues, and indeed they are. The Bonanza has a much larger speed range than a Cessna 172. Additionally, it has a much larger useful load, and the corresponding CG range available to the pilot is larger as well. And oh yeah, the wing loading of the airplane is larger still. And you have to take all these things into account, the design factors of a particular airplane. Not all airplanes are created equal. And remember that trim is to trim off all the forces that those varying CGs create at varying speeds. Virtually every low-wing loaded airplane that I know of also has a narrow speed range and a limited useful load. I tried this out on my Husky, but its trim system varies the preload on the stick, not the air load on the elevator. So I don't think it would work very well. Wing loading is a factor in having an airplane that can carry a lot, go fast, and slow. Consequently, an airplane with this type has a very large CG envelope, which means that with that wide, it has a wide trim range to accompany that. Remember that trim is used to reduce control forces throughout the envelope. The result of this test and the point of this video is to show that this full nose-up trim technique is not applicable to all airplanes, only to a specific few. And I suggest that you try it out first before needing it for real. Okay? The interesting fallout, I think, from this video is the discussion about best glide speed. And that's why the title of this talk. Remember, we're talking about power-off performance here, not with power. The trim technique noted, I believe, results in a speed nearer to min sync, even in low-wing loaded airplanes, not best glide. You need to try that out to be sure, but that's what I think. The min sync speed is a coefficient of lift / angle of attack that results in the slowest descent rate as a function of time. Okay? The best glide speed, on the other hand, is the coefficient of lift and angle of attack that results in the best range for a given altitude. Best glide is at the bottom of the total drag curve. In other words, min sync is the speed you fly if you want to stay in the air longer, and best glide is the speed you fly if you want to go as far as you can with the altitude that you have to do that with. Okay? So it's a pretty big distinction of those, and the speeds vary quite a bit. VY, VX, not a player here. Here's the interesting thing, and this is where things get a bit sticky for folks to think about. For a given configuration, the maximum glide performance is unaffected by weight. Yes, true. Best glide is achieved at a particular coefficient of lift and angle of attack for the wing. Bonanzas pretty much have the same basic wing and share characteristics between short and long body airplanes. The F-33, this is the 33 series, F and E's, are short body airplanes in the 35. They have a best glide speed of 105 knots. With the long body, it's an A-36 and its derivatives, the best glide speed is 110 knots. The glide ratio for both airplanes is exactly the same. Okay? So in other words, if we staged a race, the A-36 would beat the F-33 to the ground, and it would descend faster doing it. But they both end up in the same place. Wow. Interesting. But, as all things, when we start mixing science in with regular life, I just mixed apples and oranges. We all do it without thinking about it all the time. The angle of attack is the same, but it is achieved at different speeds, dependent on weight. Okay? As one of my fans pointed out, the speed to achieve that angle of attack is a function of weight. Okay? If we had a good, accurate angle of attack indicator, we wouldn't have to bother at all about weight. It wouldn't make any difference at all. We could just hit the angle of attack target and off we go, as long as our weight is within limits. To be fair, the coefficient of lift curve is pretty flat in this area at the very top of it, and a 5% deviation in speed is no big deal at all. I can't see how it is. This is why manufacturers set a single best glide speed. I'd also go further and say that minor deviations above or below make little difference, etc., more than 5%. We don't have good angle of attack in single-engine GA. We have speed, okay? And it's like measure with a micrometer and cut it with an axe. For low-wing loaded airplanes, this is a non-issue. For heavier airplanes, it becomes an issue. And I think this is where the teeter is it's not really an issue, this airplane. With 10% of gross weight, within 10% of gross weight, I wouldn't worry about it at all. Greater than that, it becomes a math problem. And one of my commenters used a 15% example as to work this out. So the equation actually looks like this. This is velocity best glide 2 divided by velocity best glide 1 is equal to the square root of weight 2 divided by weight 1. Okay, so when you work that out, velocity best glide 2 is equal to the square root of the weight 2 divided by weight 1 times the VB best glide 1. Okay, now we have velocity best glide is equal to 105 in the case that we're using, divided by the square root of 2900 divided by 3400. That's what my commenter had to say. And the result is 97 knots. That's an 8% difference in speed to achieve the desired AOA. To reach a 10% speed difference in my airplane, in this airplane, I have to be in the aerobatic category, and that had to be solo with nothing in the airplane and less than 30 gallons of fuel on board. In other words, calculating anything less than a 15% weight difference is a dubious thing to do in the heat of the moment. Okay, fly the airplane instead. A 10% weight difference is significant, and frankly, this is the big reason why that using manufacturers' book numbers rarely work in the real world. It's also the reason I don't teach using glide ratio as the go-to in an engine-out situation. Don't discount how stressful the situation will be when your engine's out and the fan's not turning and you're going to land. So you got to figure that out. So what does a 15% distance or difference look like in distance? For the Bonanza, the book says that a glide ratio results in 1.7 nautical miles per 1,000 feet of altitude. So if we have 4,000 feet AGL, here we're cruising along at 4,000 AGL, and we have the engine fail, we can go 6.8 miles. Using the 15% difference proposed, we are not max performing the airplane, so our new distance is more like 5.8 miles. So far, we've looked at things clinically, okay? How does the math work out? In the real world, I would suggest that this situation is not make or break. A better speed to fly? Yes, it would be, but at what cost? If you have to spend precious time in altitude trying to figure out a new reference, given your current weight, then you just wasted the advantage that you might have gained in doing that. Maybe you could put a table of reference speeds in your checklist, so boom, it happens, you pull it out and say, this is where I am, and that's the speed I fly. Kind of problematic in a way. You're not flying the airplane. Even Garmin's Smart Glide doesn't know your weight or your angle of attack, and without this input, the equation results in a little more than a guess. And I think, in my opinion, mine alone maybe, is that your head can figure that guess out better than you can using some other technology. I teach that you look out the window. If you're in the left seat, like in this airplane, I look through the wing, and my sight line to the ground, if I see a field, I can probably make it. Works at whatever altitude I am. Fly towards it. And when you get close, transition to min-sync. In other words, set best glide speed and then transition to min-sync when you have the field made. Because now you're interested in best time, not most distance. Okay, but let's think about that 4,000 feet again. Subtract low key, the altitude you need to turn base, and then high key, the altitude you need to start maneuvering to base in order to get to land on your chosen field, road, or airport, because it's not a big circle. And you subtract that from the altitude you started with, and that is the amount of time you have to fly to your field. And it isn't as much as you think. It's not 5.8 miles, it's not 6.8. In a Bonanza, to use the best case scenario numbers from above here, that would mean that we reserve 2,500 feet to maneuver to land from the original 4,000, which leaves 1,500 feet to get us to our field. So in other words, if the field isn't within 2.5 miles, something has to give, and it ain't the physics. That's why I use my sight line through the wingtip to the ground. So hopefully that helps you out. This was fun. I hope we learned something, and that will make us safer pilots, and that's the whole goal here anyway. And hey, I really thank you for commenting. I look forward to your comments again. Look closer this time, but and see that I'm not on the autopilot. My recommendation is to keep your best glide speed in your head and fly the airplane to it, and then trim off the force. And to be corny, may the force be with you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on FlyWire. Oh, and I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters here, and if you'd like to like and subscribe, right there. Thanks for watching. What the heck is best glide anyway? What the heck is best glide speed? Anyway, okay, here we go.